Section 5 of A Hypocritical Romance and Other Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Hypocritical Romance and Other Stories by Caroline Ticknor. Mr. Hurd's Holiday. "No business tomorrow, my dear," Mr. Hurd announced cheerfully to his better half, as he stepped into the sitting room and deposited several brown paper bundles upon one of the chairs. "Why, to be sure," she responded, brightening. "I had almost forgotten that it will be a holiday. What are you going to do to celebrate? I suppose that we might all go off somewhere for the day," she concluded, thoughtfully. Mr. Hurd shook his head. "There are a number of things about the house which I am intending to look into tomorrow. It is only a few days ago that you were complaining that I was not more domestic, so now I am going to turn over a new leaf. I have come to the conclusion that we are constantly paying out money to incompetent workmen for little odd repairs that I could just as well do myself. Any man with brains and the proper tools at hand can turn off a good many dollars' worth of work in his spare moments," he went on, as he removed the paper wrappings from the several bundles. "Are you sure that you are feeling as well as usual, Theodore?" his wife inquired, watching him in anxious astonishment, while she recalled her many fruitless efforts in the past to awaken in him a desire to help about some slight household detail which sadly needed attention. "Never better, my dear," he answered, unrolling a bottle of glue and setting it upon the mantelpiece. "Why do you ask?" "Well, you see, Theodore, it is such a new departure for you, that I couldn't help wondering if—" "Well, if what?" "If anything were the matter. If you were quite yourself. You're not feverish, are you, Theodore?" she concluded, running her fingers over his forehead. Mr. Hurd smiled benignly, as he produced a small can of paint and a brush which he set down next to the glue. "I'll tell you just how it happened, my dear," he said. "On my way downtown I overtook Lovering, and as we walked along together I asked him casually how he was going to celebrate tomorrow. 'As I usually spend my holidays,' he replied, 'in repairing and tinkering up things about the house, and doing my best to freeze out the carpenter and the plumber, besides sorting over old papers and putting things to rights that I seldom have a chance at.' After I left him, I began to think how many holidays I had wasted when I might have been really accomplishing something, and have had money in my pocket to boot. I have reformed, my dear," he concluded, opening the last of the paper bundles, "as you will see tomorrow. Here are half a dozen new tools which I find I need if I am to do anything of this kind really well. Isn't that a nice little hammer? And you remember that we hadn't any chisel or screwdriver that a man could properly work with." Mrs. Hurd gazed at her husband, while tears rose to her eyes. "Theodore," she said, huskily, "you have realized one of my dearest hopes. With all your faults, you have always been far ahead of other men, and now I am almost afraid you are too perfect. You're sure that you do feel quite well, and haven't any sharp pain darting through your chest?" The following morning Mr. Hurd began to carry out his good resolutions immediately after breakfast, and when the younger children urged him to go for a walk, he informed them that father had some very important work to do, but that they might watch him if they liked. Mrs. Hurd met him soon afterwards mounting the attic stairs, followed by a procession of willing helpers. "Where are you going, Theodore?" she inquired. "It is a long time since we had the tank cleaned out," he responded, "and I see no need of paying an incompetent and expensive plumber who brings another man to stand around and look at him for doing a simple thing like that." "Very well, dear," his wife said, encouragingly. "Only are you sure that you understand all about it?" "Of course I do," he replied, a trifle indignantly, and Mrs. Hurd, realizing that she ought to have more confidence in him than to suggest such a possibility, retired meekly to her own room, where she quietly settled herself to her embroidery. "It is such a comfort to have Theodore interested in these little household matters," she murmured, contentedly. "It is an education for the children, too," she meditated, as she listened to them running up and down stairs to bring their father first one thing and then another, and heard his voice from above instructing them to start all the faucets running in the bathroom, and to bring him a pail and 2 or 3 sponges. In the course of 5 minutes her youngest son appeared at her elbow. "What is it, Johnny?" she questioned. "Father wants his other pair of glasses," he announced. "He's just smashed his best ones." "What, those beautiful new pebbles?" Mrs. Hurd cried, regretfully. "How did it happen?" "Oh, he was just looking down into the tank, and they dropped off and struck on a piece of lead pipe," Johnny answered, skipping gaily away with the other pair of glasses. To him these little casualties added greatly to the enjoyment of the occasion. In a short space of time, a rap at Mrs. Hurd's door caused her to look up from her work. In the doorway stood the cook, apparently much agitated. "Oh, Mum," she gasped, breathlessly, "somethin's a leakin'. Will yez come down to the kitchen? Sure an' the ceilin's all wet and drippin' down on me." Mrs. Hurd sprang up. "They must have let the bathtub overflow," she exclaimed. "Come, we must all turn to the mops, cloths, and all the sponges we can get hold of. I suppose you know, Theodore, that you have flooded the house," she called upstairs, adding, "Quick, Johnny, bring me down all those sponges this very minute." As Johnny came leisurely downstairs with the necessary sponges, he remarked, gleefully, "Pa couldn't clean it out much of any, after all. He says that no one but the plumber can get at it." At this point, having reached his mother's side, he whispered, "He's broken his other glasses, too, but he said we needn't say anything to you about it." A little later in the morning, when the household had once more resumed its usual atmosphere of tranquillity, Mr. Hurd entered the sitting room with an air of quiet determination. "I am going to adjust that new gas burner that I bought so long ago," he remarked, displaying it. "Oh, Theodore, don't you think you had better leave it till the gas man comes?" his wife remonstrated. "Nonsense," he responded. "I should hope that I could screw on a simple fixture like that. Boys," he added, "just run down cellar and bring me up the tallest steps, and then ask Jane if she knows where the monkey wrench was put." Mrs. Hurd withdrew once more to the seclusion of her own apartments, after a timid protest regarding the danger of allowing the gas to escape too freely. She embroidered peacefully for a few moments, and was beginning to congratulate herself that all was well, when a dull thud, accompanied by a crash, caused her to spring to her feet. "Oh, what has happened?" she called out, in agonized tones. "Are you killed, Theodore?" Mrs. Hurd rushed frantically downstairs in time to catch sight of her husband picking himself up from the floor where he had apparently been seated amidst shattered fragments of several glass globes, which had accompanied his sudden descent, while the voices of the children questioned, anxiously, "Have you hurt yourself, Papa?" Before his family could ascertain how badly he had been injured, he rose majestically, swelling with righteous indignation, and even refusing to allow Mrs. Hurd to examine the cut on his left wrist, which was bleeding freely from too close a contact with one of the defunct gas globes. "It is shameful to keep a pair of steps like that in the cellar of any respectable house," he thundered, crunching the broken glass underfoot. "They are only fit for kindling wood. They should have been chopped up long ago, long ago. I never in my life saw such a shiftless set of people. Nobody takes a bit of interest in anything about the house, but everything is left for me to attend to, and I have nothing more important to do than to spend my time regulating the contents of the attic and the cellar. And now look at that!" And he pointed upwards to the half-adjusted gas fixture. Mrs. Hurd turned her eyes in that direction, and allowed them to rest regretfully on the chandelier, which was bent far out from its usual position, and no longer hung at right angles from the ceiling. "Never mind that, Theodore," she said, consolingly. "I am thankful that it broke your fall. We shall have to get the gas man here to fix it, and he can finish adjusting the new burner at the same time. So please say you won't attempt to do anything more to it just now, won't you, Theodore?" And Mr. Hurd said he wouldn't. After luncheon, Mrs. Hurd urged that it would be a good chance for them to make a long-talked-of call on their new neighbors across the way. "I've been waiting for you to go with me, Theodore," she ventured, persuasively, but he shook his head and insisted that he didn't feel like making calls. "Then I'll run over without you," she said, resignedly, thinking that he might be feeling somewhat lame after his fall from the tallest steps. "I shan't be gone long," she said, pleasantly, looking into the library, where her husband was settled comfortably with his pipe and one of the magazines. "Why don't you take a nap while I'm gone?" she suggested, pausing, with her hand on the front doorknob. Then she went cheerfully on her way. When Mrs. Hurd returned, 3/4 of an hour later, a strong odor of paint greeted her nostrils, mingled with another unmistakably like benzine. "Johnny," she inquired of her youngest boy, who was buried in a book in a distant corner of the library, "where is your father?" "Oh, he's upstairs, painting the back entry," he responded. "I was helping him, but I got some paint on me and he sent me down here." "On you?" his mother exclaimed, scrutinizing him hastily. "Say, rather, all over your lovely new suit. Oh, Johnny, how could you be so careless?" Mrs. Hurd hurried upstairs, guided by an increasing odor of paint, which plainly bespoke the continuance of Mr. Hurd's good resolutions. As she opened the door into the back entry, her husband's voice called to her to look out for the paint. "I've painted the door on both sides," he concluded, but this warning came too late, for already her velvet cape had swept against the newly coated surface. This was more than flesh and blood could withstand, and Mrs. Hurd's pent-up indignation burst forth. "I should think that you had done enough harm for one day, Theodore," she exclaimed, reproachfully. "My best cape is entirely ruined, and you know it isn't paid for yet. I meant to have told you that the bill for it came only yesterday." "Go back! Don't come out here, my dear," Mr. Hurd cried excitedly. "We've just met with an accident. They will happen in the best regulated families, you know." Here his voice took on a more persuasive tone, as he cast a hurried look at his wife, who stood like some avenging spirit in the doorway, and then he stooped down and continued to rub the carpet energetically with a roll of cloth which he held in one hand. "Have you decided to paint the entry carpet with a whole roll of my emergency bandages, Theodore?" Mrs. Hurd said, coldly. "I thought you had bought yourself a new brush for that purpose." Then she relented slightly at sight of his dejected countenance, as he knelt upon the floor. "What was the catastrophe this time?" she questioned, mournfully. "I was opening that largest pot of paint, and very excellent paint it is, too," he responded volubly, "when Johnny knocked my elbow, wholly by accident, my dear, and sent the contents all over the floor. So we have had rather bad work here with it, but it's pretty much all up now," he announced, with an effort at great cheerfulness, as he gave a final rub with the emergency bandage. "After all, this carpet is about worn out. Mr. Hurd went on, "so a little paint on it doesn't matter. Moreover, I told the boys that they might as well begin to take it right up, and I would see about getting a new one tomorrow. They're workers, I can tell you. Why, they have taken out all the tacks already. And, by the way, Johnny stepped on one and ran it into his foot, and I told him he had better let you look at the place, to see if there was any danger of his having lockjaw, or anything of that sort. I will go and bathe his foot in hot water at once," she replied, turning to depart. Then she paused and looked across the back entry at her husband, who stood confronting her in his shirt sleeves. "May I ask why the stopper is out of that bottle of benzine?" she queried. "Oh," he answered, meekly, putting in the cork. "I got a little paint on my own coat, and I thought that benzine would take it off. I've heard you say that it was the best thing." Mrs. Hurd lifted her skirts gingerly, and stepped across the entry carpet. "I will take your coat and get off the paint, Theodore," she said, reassuringly, "if you will promise me one thing. Promise me that you will, under no circumstances, help any more about the house." "Very well," he assented. "Then I won't melt up any of that glue I brought home to mend the chairs with." "No, no, indeed," she protested, earnestly. "If you have any love for me, Theodore, say that you will do nothing of the sort. It is all very well for ordinary men who haven't your talents and ability, to do such things. But with you it is quite different. You are capable of something better. Spend your holidays any way you like. Go to the club, go fishing, eat, smoke, play billiards. But give me your word that, whatever happens, you will never be helpful about the house again." And, with his hand upon the benzine bottle, Mr. Hurd took a solemn oath that he never would. Section 5.